Welcome to the Transformation Talks podcast, in-depth conversations on transformation with Rajiv Dingra, founder and CEO of RDNX Network.
Hi everyone, welcome again to another edition of Transformation Talks podcast. Today we have an exciting guest with us who has immense experience in deep tech as an entrepreneur as well as a venture investor. Let me first formally introduce our guest today. It is Manish Singhal, who is the founder of Pi Ventures. He's a technologist turned entrepreneur turned venture capitalist. He aspires to put India on the deep tech innovation map of the world via his work at Pi Ventures. He brings over 28 years of experience across diverse sets of fields, building cutting-edge deep technology products at global scale, mentoring startups, investing in them, and building a deep tech venture fund. Manish started Pi Ventures in the early 2016 with a vision of accelerating the development of deep tech startups in India. Besides for being a venture capitalist, he's also a certified coach under the International Coaching Federation of USA. He's a keen psychologist and volunteers his time to help people facing mental health issues. And he's also an amateur wildlife photographer. We are excited to welcome Manish. Welcome, Manish, to Transformation Talks.
Thank you, Rajiv. My pleasure to be here.
So Manish, you have had quite a journey, and 28 years is quite a long journey. What made you realize the potential of deep tech almost 5 years ago in 2016? And how did you therefore come about starting Pi Ventures? Give us a bit of background there.
Sure. I think my love for technology is pretty old. I think that as an engineer, when I graduated from IIT Kanpur back in '92, I had this crazy idea about doing something which you can doing a product which you can hold in your hand, right? And that actually meant that not just software. And somehow, as luck would have it, I ended up working for the next 18 years in different forms of deep tech products, which were in those days cutting edge of whatever the cutting edge of technology there was. So, for example, I built a GPS for Indian Army back in '93, '94. And those days, the GPS was not small, which could go in your watch or this was like half a shoebox for a Jawan to carry on his back.
27 years back.
27 years back, right? And then not many will remember that I actually, the first form of Zoom, the video telephone. I worked on a video telephone back in 1994. And now we take it for granted. And worked also on MPEG-4 standardization in '97. Then created a bunch of IPs in the early part of 2000. And probably the most successful product of my career has been the Sling Box, which lets you watch your TV anywhere in the world. So during this journey of 18 years, few things baked in my DNA. One is a keen sense of being comfortable at the cutting edge of technology. I think that is very important to understand from various aspects. Second is to look for things that can transform the world. And third is have some sort of a mental model to be able to sort of back yourself to be able to working in that area, because it comes with its own risks. And so that was to answer your question, that was a seed that got seeded over 18 years in my more as a deep tech operator, if I can use that word. And then the last 10 years or 11 years in my journey has been very different. Initially, I started off as actually supporting other companies as an angel investor. But along the way, I was fairly clear that if I have to make a multiplier effect, I have to work on multiple problems at the same time, not one problem at the same time. And that meant, more of an investor role than an entrepreneur role. And one thing led to the other, and then founded Pi in 2016. And I think now the funny thing is, in 2016, I felt that, over the course of years, I've seen that, India has come of ages. We are talking about entrepreneurs trying to push the boundary on technology use cases, several things opening up within India where businesses are willing to work with Indian startups, etc., etc. So we felt that there is a good time to actually back some disruptive AI companies to begin with, and then we have done something more. We've actually backed a space rocket company as well, Agnicool, which is very interesting. So I think the confidence built over a period of time that we could do this. And one thing I have to say is that one of the most challenging parts in the Indian ecosystem has been that deep tech entrepreneurs always sort of struggle to convince investor when they are very early in their journey, because there's hardly anything to show or believe in. And I think we take pride in Pi Ventures about that, right? So we've been deep tech operators, and we are able to recognize that potential earlier than conventional investors would, because we can go deeper into technology and business use cases. So felt like this is something my destiny sort of holds, and wanted to do something which is support entrepreneurs who are sort of cutting edge, working on the cutting edge of products and technology.
And I'm sure at the early stage, it's a lot of exciting ideas which are forward looking over the next decade or so. So, you invest across deep tech, AI, IoT, blockchain, and also space technology now. So which are the industries or segments you feel are going to be most disrupted or impacted this coming decade by these plethora of deep tech technologies? And you can go beyond AI, IoT, blockchain, 3D printing, whatever you think and believe. And you can take as much time on this answer, because this is one that I think our audience would be very interested to know, that what are the industries and segments as probably budding entrepreneurs, or even as other colleagues of yours in the investor space might be looking at. What do you think is going to be disrupted and impacted by deep tech over the next decade?
Short answer, everything.
That's pretty convincing, because our premise of this podcast is that we believe it's going to be everything. But if you were to pick areas where you've seen value and startups that are becoming very, very interesting, even if you may have or may not have invested in them, and they look like global disruptors.
Sure. I think I'll answer that question slightly differently. And the reason I will do that is because at Pi, we do not track sectors per se. We are very sector agnostic, but we do track and think about how technology will change sectors. It's a slightly bottom-up, technology-driven, married with use case kind of approach.
That's very interesting.
So I'll give you some examples, of course, as we go along in this discussion. So fundamentally, I believe that there are lots of products which work on digital data, right? So Google Map is working on data, Alexa is built on digital, right? So some of the products are built on digital, right? So whenever you have data going, I think everything in the world will require more intelligence from data than whatever is there today, being possible by technology, right? And that intelligence will be brought by AI. So our belief is that the right use case for AI will disrupt many sectors, many sectors. Starting from healthcare, we have 3 investments in healthcare which are doing very well. In enterprise, we are seeing a lot of use cases in enterprise changing. Logistics, right? That's another very interesting area. FinTech, right? You name an area, and I will tell you one disruptive use case of AI, right? That's how we are looking at the digital world of AI. And we go bottom up, study the space and do all that. In that one of the key things I would like to kind of highlight is within AI, you have these companies, what we call as AI first companies and AI second companies. In AI first companies, we look at use cases which can fundamentally only be done by AI. So for example, we have a company called Visa, which is in mental health conversations, right? So it is a therapy bot. You can chat with the Visa to resolve your emotional and other issues. And that technology, that product cannot be built without AI, right? There's no way. Whereas, there could be some other product where, you're getting the basic functionality done, but AI adds a layer. So we call those AI second startups. In our thesis, AI first startups fundamentally change the rules of engagement in any space, and therefore they disrupt the business model. They create a new way of working. And we've seen that across multiple startups that we have in our portfolio. Visa is disrupting how mental health is being handled. Pixis is disrupting how digital marketing automation is being handled. Niramai is disrupting how early stage breast cancer can be done, and so on and so forth. I have so many examples here, right? And so that's one set of technology trend that we are tracking and how that is disrupting sectors. The second technology trend that I would like to talk about is in the space of materials, right? So just like for AI, data is required. For a lot of other startups which are in the physical world, material science becomes that fabric under on which a lot of innovation happens. A new way of material can change how things are done. So, for example, just think about it: a world without plastics and world with plastics. I think there are obvious issues with that. But just imagine your life without plastic. Can you imagine your life without plastic? Very difficult, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, plastic was invented, right? So the material science changes the way people work with the ecosystem. So there are some very interesting work happening in the healthcare. For example, we've met companies which are actually looking at 3D printing parts of the human body. We've looked at companies which, an Indian company itself, right, which has actually created an artificial cornea which can be replaced in human. We've also looked at this artificial food, which looks like meat but is actually not meat, right? And several other things. The fundamentally how material changes what we do is very significant to the whole world of deep tech and the use cases thereby. The third technology that I would like to talk about, which is slightly futuristic, not yet there today, is the whole world of quantum computing. I think every few years we are hit with a new paradigm of computing, and I think quantum computing is surely coming. It may be 2 to 3 years away from mass adoption and real commercial implications, but once it comes, it will change the paradigm of computing completely. I think the way we know AI today itself will change. The way security is done, that will change. So quantum computing once it becomes out there, I think will change, will disrupt whatever we know today in the digital world. So in short, three very prominent trends in front of us. One is the whole disruption that artificial intelligence will cause across sectors. The other is the material advances in material science, which will have impact in what we eat, what we live, how we live, and etc. etc. And the third is the quantum computing, which is slightly out there, slightly far ahead in time, but it will have disruptive implications on how we interact with the world.
Um, I would want to delve a little deeper into two more technologies, which are
Yeah,
IoT and blockchain. In a sense,
sure.
the data, sort of explosion that IoT might bring. How do you see that? And do you see startups being able to, build, IoT startups that can disrupt the big larger companies who have maybe more disposable capital at their end? And also blockchain, because a lot of people confuse blockchain, the technology, with cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to know investors' viewpoint on blockchain, given how much noise there has been on cryptocurrency in India.
Sure. I think both good questions. So let me take one by one. So IoT, in our viewpoint, does not stand out as a separate technology trend. What
Sure.
will IoT produce? I think we have to understand that IoT will ultimately produce time series data. It will produce data basically, right? And that data is useless unless there is a layer on it to handle it. And that's where the AI will come, right? So
Correct.
we see IoT as a subset of an AI trend, and we see IoT as something which will convert a physical signal into a digital signal for artificial intelligence to take over and make sense of it, right? So we
Sure.
sort of think about IoT that way. Blockchain And you're right. I mean, a lot of times blockchain gets clubbed with crypto, but that's not the case. Blockchain has a lot more use cases beyond crypto. Could be in how supply chain trust network can be built, etc., etc. But not very hot on blockchain, if you ask me personally, because I've seen a lot of resistance for adoption of blockchain. To me, it does not. It gives you a additional layer of efficiency. But one thing I have noticed, right, that when does technology, so there is, as human beings, there is always a resistance to change, resistance to change, to do things differently, right? And when do we make that change? When do we make the effort to make that change? We do that when there is a, what I call as a 10x difference in the outcome, right? So if by adopting a new technology or a new way of working, if it is making an incremental difference to my life, I may or may not be motivated to do it. But if it makes a disruptive difference, or it makes a huge difference to what I do, then I am more likely to adopt that change. In blockchain's case, I am not seeing that yet, and so therefore I would not. Personally, I'm not hot on that, and I'm happy to be proven wrong with time, because technology trends tend to change sometimes rather quickly.
No, that's very well put. Let me get your view on the last 5 6 years. You've had what I would say the hot seat view of the startup and deep tech scene in India. How do you think the same has transformed over the last 5 6 years? In what ways has it become better? In what ways it still needs a lot of change? And in what ways and means is it possibly not going in the right direction, where a lot more is needed from the different stakeholders of this scene?
All right. I think several changes which are looking positive, especially in the last few years. One is, I think every year, I feel the quality of entrepreneurship and the quality of the ideas is a notch above than the previous year. Right, that has been a consistent trend I'm seeing.
Sure.
The other trend that I'm seeing is that India as a market for our startups is actually opening up. It is not the best paying market, but it's a great market as a first market for our companies to do business with. So a lot of our companies have actually launched in India, got into a certain level of revenue, and then obviously global demand takes over, and that has been very good for our companies as well, right? So that is a very welcome change. Third welcome change is the whole system is getting a little bit relieved from its constipation, money constipation. So earlier, and to extent large now as well, money keeps going in, hardly comes out. But in the last few years, you would have seen that several exits have happened, and that money flow is very important for the investing economy, economic wheel to turn. I think that is also some early signs of positive signs to see. Fourth
Sure.
is the availability of capital. I think it has never been a better time to be an entrepreneur as in the last few years. Because if you're doing something meaningful, if you have a good team together, there is money available at all stages of your entrepreneurship, right? At the idea level, to your first product level, to scale level, etc. There are pools and pools of capital. There are lots of people investing in startups, and that is very, very heartening to see. Right.
Right.
One thing I would like to point out from a deep tech angle is, that the level of ideas, the boldness in the ideas has gone multifold up. And here I would like to bring out the example of Agnikul, one of our companies. They are actually creating small rockets for launching of small satellites, and they are the world's only company to have a fully 3D printed single piece rocket engine. In fact, last week they were able to ground test it successfully, and now they became the world's only company to have ground tested a fully 3D printed single piece rocket engine in the world, right? This is path breaking for an Indian deep tech ecosystem. And an idea like this, to be able to conceive this kind of an idea and take on the world with it, in a place where sometimes you feel that deep tech capital is not available. You have to kind of give it, give it to our entrepreneurs there. And this actually brings a lot of responsibility on funds like us. When entrepreneurs are taking those bold steps, then funds like us, should we remain in our conventional thinking, or can we be bold enough to back these ideas along with them? Unless we match step to step with them, this momentum can die, right? So there is a I would say on the need side, there are two things I would like to see differently. I would like to see Indian venture investors become more bolder than they are.
Sure.
And second thing I would like to see is that more M&A activity should happen in India. I think it is already, wheel is starting to turn, but there is a lot more work to be done on that side.
Okay, that's amazing insight. I want to look at this comparison that you made, about India and the world. Both from a deep tech adoption perspective by large corporates and by early startups, looking at deep tech, as well as from a capital availability perspective. Where do you think India is vis-a-vis large global markets like US, China, and Southeast Asia? And you can take your time to probably give us a sense of the challenges and struggles, or maybe the advantage of India as a market vis-a-vis these three global markets.
Sure. Somehow I'm not in the boat of comparing ourselves with other countries. I think it just puts an apple and oranges kind of comparison, and it puts us in a wrong light. Number one, it also pushes us to do things differently, which are not natural to our DNA. So
Fair.
I'll answer this question slightly differently if you don't mind, right? So
No
I think
worries. Yeah.
all these countries are on their own path on that one, right? India will create its own path to how deep tech system will mature here. And one of the key things that India holds is the amount of money that is required in India is sometimes 5x, sometimes 10x, sometimes 100x lower than a company abroad to make the same thing. So let me give you an example. Agnikul will be able to do a commercial space flight in around 15 to 20 million dollars maximum, right? Whereas some of the companies in the US have raised $500 million and still not gone to space commercially, right? Just imagine the amount of difference we're talking about here.
Correct.
Niramai, one of our breast cancer screening company, went from an idea to a live hospital installation in less than $500,000, right? I would bet that if similar company was in the US or some other place, it would probably take anywhere from $6 to $10 million just to get going. So the amount of capital efficiency this country has is mind-boggling, and that we have to factor it in, right? So if companies outside are raising 100, maybe we can do the same job in raising 10, right? So that actually gives you a lot of sense of scale that is required to do India deep tech ecosystem, and therefore I feel that the comparison is not fair, right? We have to look at in the context of what we are doing.
Sure.
What can we do differently to push it? To me, there is only one thing which I already said. I think, can the Indian investors be bold enough and match their boldness, match their entrepreneurs' boldness, and back them in their beliefs early on? Right? That is the only thing that is required. Everybody is sitting on capital. They have a lot of money. Everybody wants to do deep tech, but shy away when it comes to really pushing, putting the pen to the paper. And that's where at least my journey in the next few years will be, to how I can make it easy for our entrepreneurs and our ecosystem to back entrepreneurs who have these disruptive thoughts and ideas.
There is a question that comes from that, is that there has always been, at least a few years ago, there was always this question mark on the maturity of early stage entrepreneurs, especially the first time entrepreneurs, and I believe you come across them more than anyone else in this space. Is there been a transformation in that maturity level? And when I mean maturity, it's also from the standpoint of how long, how deep, how hard they would want to grind and scale, because this is a tough space in a tough country. And from that perspective, what's your view on the maturity?
Short answer, maturity is, as I said before, is improving with every team we meet and every year the teams we meet at a macro level. But I'll answer this question slightly differently as well, right? This is a little bit an overhyped scenario that as a second time entrepreneur, you can do better. Of course, you can do better, right? Because you've learned a lot of things as a first time entrepreneur. But if you are a first time entrepreneur, you cannot just change that destiny and become a second time entrepreneur, right? I mean, so what do you do differently as a first time entrepreneur when you are at it, right? Yeah. And I think one of the skills that I have always valued in people that I work with is essentially their ability to learn quickly and adapt to the situations, right? So you could be a first time entrepreneur, but there is always enough guidance available around you. You have friends, you have board members, you have investors. There is a lot of material today out there. Everybody is talking about stuff on Twitter and other places. So if you are smart enough, you will actually learn from experiences of yourself and experience of others to do your first time entrepreneurship as good as second time entrepreneurship, quote unquote, right? And therefore, those are the people who will do very good. And we have seen that in our companies as well. In our companies, a lot of companies like Visa team is first time entrepreneurs, they're doing brilliantly. Pixis is first time entrepreneurs, they're doing brilliantly. Locus is a first time entrepreneur, they're doing brilliantly. Agnikul, Niramai, they're all first time entrepreneurs. We have lots of first time entrepreneurs and they're doing all really well. And one thing that actually differentiates them from some of the others is, they have learned on the job. They've obviously made mistakes during the journey, but they've learned how and adopted and then persisted and persevered.
Sure. Manish, let's make this more interesting. Is there a area, an idea, a concept or something that you believe if someone to come as an entrepreneur and work on it and come and pitch to you, it would, you would be, cutting a check right there. So is there a area, as a venture capitalist, I'm sure you guys, there is a lot of discussion around, hot sectors or hot opportunities, but you don't find a startup working on that hot opportunity. So would you be gracious enough to share with our listeners such an opportunity that you have been able to notice?
I think there are many. There are very interesting use cases which are emerging. To name a few ideas that I'm personally very excited about, but haven't seen a good startup, founder combination yet, is can we make Zoom meetings as humane as meeting in person? What will it take to bring the whole experience of meeting someone physically over Zoom? Right, that will require reimagination of the entire landscape of Zoom. I think that is something that excites me about thinking about that. Some of the other ideas, there are some other ideas as well. Would love to see if the whole what we call as the transactional flows of a supply chain or different transaction flows, if that based on the data can be made super intelligent and super trustworthy using some data intelligence and other technologies, right? That could be another idea. In the deep tech space, the beyond digital deep tech, as we call it, I'm very fascinated by anything that you can do with materials differently, like I talked before, like supported Agnikul, right? They are a very interesting company which has done innovations in how 3D printing can be used, how material science can be used to a different outcome. And there are several applications of that in healthcare as well. So I'm very keen to see if some innovation in healthcare can help in a meaningful way. Similarly, remote diagnostics of non-intrusive diagnostics of any diseases which are life-threatening is another interesting area that I always think about. Like we backed Nirama in that case. So yeah, these are some of the sample ideas, if I can say that way. And I'm sure there are a lot more, but these are something that come top of my mind.
Super. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Uh, tell us, if there are large corporate CEOs listening to this podcast, what would you, as someone who has a almost a ringside view of the innovation with deep tech, what would you tell them to do so that they do not get disrupted by future deep tech startup? What kind of suggestion or how would I say 2 cents you would like to give to top CEOs running maybe large companies and this impending deep tech disruption that you see so closely at the trenches with the startups?
I think, in my opinion, top companies have lost the race there. I think the top companies typically lose their way in innovating in their own DNA. Somehow, the very few companies have been able to keep themselves on the innovation curve when they become big. So I think the only way, in my opinion, that they can keep abreast with what's happening in the world is to have a formal program of some kind, which helps them interact with startups on a large scale. So you could do that by having suppose a venture capital firm within your firm which invests in startups. You could have an accelerator where you could have acceleration program for startups within your firm, or you could have some other sort of startup engagement. What I have seen, although every almost lot of companies making a mistake there, that they become a bit myopic about that, and the red tape starts to flow, and then the company starts to say, unless it is extremely beneficial to my business units, etc., we are not going to do this, we are not going to do that. So there are a lot of restrictions starts to come on those programs, and that limits them in their own exposure to what else is possible. So I would recommend the CEOs of big companies to kind of have an open mind about it, develop programs which interact with startups at different levels with a slightly open agenda and not a very close, hard agenda. That's one way of keeping in abreast with the change.
Great. So final question for our podcast, and this is targeted to the early stage startup entrepreneur. What should he be? Let's say there is a deep tech idea, and maybe a deep tech product. What are the few things that an entrepreneur should get right before he approaches you or investors like you in his deep tech startup? What are the 2 or 3 things that he should have in place, and and what do you really look out for?
Sure. There may be only one thing actually in this, right? So one is what I have seen typically is that most of the deep tech entrepreneurs, they are actually how should I say, they have an innovation first thinking typically, right? So in some sense, they've come up with an innovation and they're very proud about it. But sometimes in that whole process, it becomes sometimes a quest of finding, you already have a solution and let's find the problem where it can fit, and that actually sometimes loses the battle. So
Correct.
it's not a science project. Deep tech startup is not a science project. Deep tech startup is actually built when a pertinent and an apparent customer need in the market can be solved by your innovation in a very disruptive way. Both are equally important. There has to be a problem which can be solved. So I'll give you some examples here. Like Niramai, for
Yes.
example, solves very, very early stage breast cancer screening problem. No, it's not, it's unsolved problem till today. We invested 3 years back, right? Till today, there is no other alternate solution to detect breast cancer that early as Niramai can do, because most of the other technologies actually work on density-based method, whereas Nirama is able to find out abnormal cell growth, right? So, it could be an interesting technology, but here is a case where a great global need is coming together with a unique and a fundamentally different solution that it can solve for. Similarly, Agnikul. Small satellites are hurting to go in space at the time that they want, at the cost that they want. And current technologies do not address that problem. So now Agnikul has come up with small rockets which can do that, right? So there is a business use case and there is a problem, there is a solution that you have which is very unique. I think that combination is important. You don't have one of them, you are not a deep tech startup. So my only request and advice and suggestion to all deep tech entrepreneurs is that it is not a science project. The business use case has to marry with the technical innovation that you have. And if that marriage is looking healthy and win-win, then you have got a deep tech startup going.
Manish, this was an extremely engaging and I must say a very clear and concise and to the point, suggestions and pointed insights that were shared by you. We really enjoyed having you on the Transformation Talks. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for listening to the Transformation Talks podcast hosted by Rajiv Dingra, founder and CEO of RD&X Network. Tune in next week for another interesting episode.